Namaskaram and a very good evening to all of you. How are you guys doing? Hello everyone. Alright, so my name is Karishma and I do this series on behalf of Unacademy because I am your VRC educator at Unacademy. And we are doing episode 21 today, which means we have covered 20 solid, super duper, fun, insightful, research based articles based on a variety of genres. And I am definitely sure that they must have helped you improve your RC. Is it or is it not? Please be true, okay? I also hope that the RC genre scores that we have done in the plus classes has helped you greatly with genres like philosophy, psychology, economics, so on and so forth. So my endeavor of making things simpler for you continues, and we hope that as we enter another month, July, very soon, and the exam is pretty close. So we have July, August, September and October. I don't really like counting November at all. So in these coming 4 months, we're going to do perhaps 40 more sessions, and these 40 more sessions we're going to do 40 difficult, irritating, boring articles, but making them interesting. This is why before I start today's session, I want all of you to participate very actively in these sessions. They are pretty short. 30 minutes is absolutely nothing. Yeah, please check out your screen time if you think 30 minutes is a lot. And please use the comment section and not the live chat section to send in your recommendations of what articles do you want me to pick up. You can write the article title as it is verbatim along with the website name, or just post the link and I'll try and figure it out. If you are an Unacademy student, you can share your recommendations in the classes or on Telegram also. So I hope that the entire crusade that I began a couple of months ago with the mission of helping all my crybabies get rid of the Fandare ma'am samajh hi nahi aata, what is this, I'm a science student, I can't understand this, or I'm a commerce student, I can't understand that. I hope that has been solved to a great extent if you have been regular with me. Today we are going to talk about what you see in the picture. So you can see the Indian flag, the Indian currency in the background, and of course 3 letters picked up from the Scrabble keyboard, G, D and P. So GDP. Now I have discussed a couple of articles with you about GDP. So we did one article from The Economist which talked about people are sitting, the rich people of the world are sitting on piles of cash, but are they going to spend it? Yeah, that's one that we have done. And the another one that we have done in the classes is that, is GDP a correct portrayal of how well we are doing in the country? Before I start with my explanations, I want to hear from you. Do you think that GDP is a good representation of how well the country's people are doing in terms of economy, of course, monetarily? All right. So meanwhile you type your answers, I'll quickly make a couple of announcements. I'm doing a fantastic, much needed, much awaited session on how to handle close options in VARC, which remains like one of the greatest causes of concern throughout all the 10 years that I have been teaching. So we'll discuss this, and this will be a longer than usual session, maybe 45 minutes or 60 minutes, and we'll do it on YouTube, which means it's free for everybody. So please come on 28th at 4:30 p.m. Apart from this, I am doing a free Q&A class. If you have any questions that you think remain unanswered on YouTube or Unacademy, maybe free classes, then you can come up for a chit chat with me, ask me your doubts, and I'll try and help you to the best of my capacity. I'm doing an extremely important session on 3rd of July. This is a 2-hour session, and I don't know whether we'll be able to finish it in 2 hours, but I'll try my best. 11:30 morning to 1:30 noon, we are going to have a detailed discussion with all the data on how can you analyze your mocks and how do you take your preparation a notch up now that we are in July. This is a July session, first Saturday of July. So extremely important, the announcements that I made. Please make sure that you attend them, and I'm sure you will thank me. Or even if you don't, then at least you will send me some blessings, and that's good for me. I'm doing grammar classes these days. We had adjectives today. We'll do another one day after tomorrow. Tomorrow you can come, even if you're a new student, please come tomorrow at 7:30 for a practice session from PYQs, previous year questions and mock tests. Advanced VRC course and critical reasoning courses are coming up in July. Please enroll yourselves. Now, what is GDP? When we talk about GDP, we have discussed the definition earlier as well. It says GDP is a measure of a country's economic output that accounts for its number of people. Now, when I say per capita, please understand that the root word cap means head. So you wear a cap on your head, topi, yeah. So you call it a cap. So the word cap comes from there. There's another word. If you're a GOT fan, I'm sure you were just when all those GOT fans start thinking that Ned Stark is the hero of the series, he's decapitated, which means he's beheaded, and you are like, oh my god, what the hell is this? So decapitate is sir kaat dena, sir kalam kar dena, behead. So captain, another word from this root, all right, and then of course capita. So per capita simply translates to per head. It's a Latin root. Okay, so GDP per capita means GDP per head. It's different from GDP. This is the formula. Per capita real GDP is equal to real GDP divided by population. Why are we dividing this by population? Because we just discussed. We are finding GDP per capita, which means per head. All right. Rahul, I'll answer your doubt after we are done with this. Also, let's take a look at the definition. So GDP, now before the definition, this is a very common interview question, especially from science students who are not very good at economics. I'm not judging you, I'm just saying putting out the general trend out there. People will ask you, what is the current GDP of India? So then right now, the current prices in 2021, if you look at the current data, it is somewhere around 197.46 lakh crores, mota 198 lakh crores. Against the first revised estimates of 203 lakh crores in 2019 to 20, which means we have fallen. Okay, so there is a decline of minus 3% as compared to a 7.8% growth before COVID. Okay, so in 2019 BC, before Corona, there was a 7.8% growth. We were seemingly doing very well, but thanks to the virus, we are down by minus 3. There's another term which will come in the article today. Please don't get confused about it, and you don't need to ratify anything. The Gini index or the Gini coefficient is some people also pronounce it as Gini. It's a proper noun because it's been named after Corrado Gini. So whatever way you pronounce it, least of my considerations right now. So Gini coefficient is a measure of the distribution of income across a population developed by this guy in 1912. Now we basically use it to measure inequality in terms of income. So, the rich becoming richer and the poor becoming poorer, the entire capitalistic theory that we did. It is often used as a gauge of economic inequality, measuring income distribution or less commonly wealth distribution among a population. So whenever we want to talk about economic inequality, we use the Gini index or the Gini coefficient. So we're going to discuss today why GDP is good, why is it bad, what can be done about it, and so on and so forth. Another thing that usually is discussed in various articles like this is per capita income. So per capita is per head. So per capita income of an area will be the total income of an area divided by the number of people living in that area. So that's the per capita income. So I hope that these words don't haunt you anymore. We have had our share of discussion on all of these. If you're a plus student, please watch the genres course for further details. Let's begin with the article. In defense of GDP as a measure of economic growth. Ever since India revised the way it calculates its GDP in 2015, there has been a debate raging not just about how India calculates it, but also about GDP as a measure itself. Since 2015, there is a debate about, are we calculating the GDP in the correct way? Are we missing out on things? And is GDP a good measure in itself? So why are we putting forward this question that are we accurate or not? So just imagine, forget the screen, okay? Just listen to me. I tell you that GDP basically is the value combined of all the products and services within the political boundaries of a country. And I have discussed an example earlier where I taught you about, let's say there is an Indian flight, let's say Indigo or whatever, and it is going away to America. That does not mean that the money spent on that flight will be counted in America's GDP. It will be counted in India's GDP because even when it's going to America, even if it stays there for a while, it is still our political boundary. It's not about geographical boundary. So the geographical boundary gets crossed the moment you cross Indian subcontinent, yeah. But because you will come back here, or let's say you're a member of an embassy in some country, it is still our income because it is our citizen who is working, and more or less that money comes back unless you are permanently staying there or something. So you need to get that clarity between political boundary and geographical boundary, okay. So we're going to discuss whether are we calculating it correctly and whether it's a good measure in itself. Also, why do you think that can we go incorrect while measuring GDP? See, we are a huge country. Okay, how much do you think can the government really manage to calculate the total exact number of the goods and services we produce? Because For example, I'm sure if you come from a small town, I come from one, there are a lot of services which are granted informally. For example, in my community, it's like very popular. It's dying actually in Delhi, etc. But in smaller towns, a lot of Sindhi women are very famous for making awesome papads. Okay, so the papad industry is largely run by Sindhi women, especially in small towns, and they sell those dal ki badiya and papads. And you must have heard about that agarbatti, incense stick business that runs small scale. Then there is Lijjat Papad, which was a microcosm of the huge microeconomic model that operates in cottage industries and stuff. So there is so much of work which is happening informally, which is never, there's no PAN card associated with it. There are no taxes being paid. There are no bills being cut. There is no account transaction happening. It's just the cash exchanges hands, and it's all happening very, very, I would say, on a very local level. The government can never ever account for these informal transactions, which means that the GDP calculations or estimates that are done often miss out on this informal or local sector. So these are a couple of reasons why the GDP calculation might not be right. Let's delve further into this, deeper into this. This says, before tackling either of these questions, let's recollect how GDP is defined. The IMF, International Monetary Fund, states that GDP measures the monetary value of final goods and services, that is, those that are bought by the final user, produced in a country in a given period of time. Usually, if you are a commerce student, you know that it's usually taken as a year, one fiscal year. So when you say one fiscal year, it's from 1st April to 31st of March. That's one fiscal year, financial year. If you take one Gregorian calendar year, then it's from 1st January to 31st of December. It is important to note that GDP maps the final goods and services. Beech ka kharcha nahi, final ginte hain. For example, you have let's say a mixer grinder at home. So when you have a mixer grinder, there are blades involved in it, steel blades. Okay, you might have jars that are of plastic or steel. Then there is a rubber attached on the lid. Then there are buttons. And then I bought a good brand recently which has fed-in menu like a washing machine. So all of that software is operating. Then there is a wire and everything. Now all of this is not manufactured necessarily by the brand. It could be picking up raw material from various places. It could be getting its plastic from somewhere. It could be getting its steel from somewhere. It could be taking help from a chef in understanding how mixers and grinders can be made smoother for women, especially because India, most women are the people, women is the gender, or females are the gender who are actually doing most of the cooking. So there are various people involved and various costs involved. But what does GDP consider? GDP considers, so I bought that mixer grinder for 25,000. So the 25,000 is considered in the GDP. The costs are not considered repeatedly. So they will not count ki usse kitna liya, usse kitna liya, usse kitna liya. They're not doing that. So final product ka final cost is counted. Intermediate costs are not counted. As such, if a tree is cut, let's say, to make 3 cricket bats, okay, so willow bats are very common in India. Kashmir has a huge industry. So when you are, driving through the lanes of Jammu and Kashmir, you will see that there are like, I don't know, maybe lakhs, and that's not an exaggeration, of bats, one piled up one, upon the another for sunbathing, because the harsher the sun, the stronger the bat becomes. So the trees are being cut, okay, willow trees are grown there, and they make 3 cricket bats maybe out of one tree. Then the final market value of those 3 bats is the number that gets added to the GDP. So GDP, for example, if the bat sold at 2,000 rupees a bat maybe, so then 6,000 will be counted in the GDP. We will not count the market value of wood and what are the different stages of processing that are going on in between, okay, in the middle of it. So supply chain costs are not counted. The final price of the good is counted. What about the larger question about the appropriateness of GDP as a measure of economic growth? So this was one example that tackled with the first half of the questions, that how are we calculating it? We are considering only the final price of the final good. Larger question is how appropriate it is, how suitable it is. So then for a while GDP's dominance has been questioned. So people are debating ki kitna actually GDP dominate karti. There is so much of news. You will Google and you will find out GDP gir raha hai, GDP is falling, what is the government doing about it, blah blah blah. So why is there is such a hue and cry about it? In 2008, Nicolas Sarkozy, who was the president of France, commissioned a report from Joseph Stiglitz, who was the president of the commission, Amartya Sen, the Indian advisor, economic advisor, and Jean-Paul Fitoussi, who was the coordinator, to identify the limits of GDP as an indicator of economic performance and social progress, including the problems with its measurement, to consider what additional information might be required for the production of more relevant indicators of social progress, to assess the feasibility of alternative measurement tools, and to discuss how to present the statistical information in an appropriate way. Now, do not get bothered about abhi ye kya likha hai itna sara, and it's a huge list and stuff. Nicolas Sarkozy, who's the French president, he asked these three experts, let's just call them for now, कि भैया please make a study, research, and then find out that what are the factors that limit GDP as an indicator of economic performance. So when we say that GDP is rising, the country is becoming richer, the GDP is falling, the country is losing its riches, or the economy is going down, what are the factors, what are the limits that indicate that GDP is a good indicator of economical performance? Is it nice or is it not nice? Economic, not economical. And social progress also. So is there progress that we see, or GDP is independent of that? Then what are the problems with its measurement? So like we discussed the example of bats, we discussed the example of the mixer grinder. So is measuring GDP easy? I'm sure you've understood by now that it's not an easy task. And then if it's not easy, then what are the problems? What is the additional information that we need to make the production of more relevant indicators of social progress? So apart from GDP, what should we talk about when we talk about social progress? What are the various indicators? Assess the feasibility, which means the practicability of alternative measurement tools. So again, indicators ko pad liya, then what are the alternative measurement tools, or are we just completely relying on one factor like GDP? And then discuss how can we present all of that properly in terms of statistics, because we can't keep on just talking theoretically. In the 2018 book Beyond GDP, Measuring What Counts for Economic and Social Performance by Stiglitz, this guy, Joseph Stiglitz, Fitoussi and Durand, built on the Stiglitz, Sen, Fitoussi reports to find alternatives to GDP. So these three people came together and they filed a report, and on the basis of that report, three people, two out of these, the Amartya Sen is not involved, I guess, there's another person, Durand. So these three people came together and wrote this book, Beyond GDP. That's the shorter title, and the complete title is Measuring What Counts for Economic and Social Performance. Similarly, in The Growth Delusion, that's another book written in 2018 by David Piling, a senior journalist from the Financial Times raised what sounds like a commonsensical question. Our policies are geared relentlessly towards increasing a standard measure of growth, GDP. So now, whenever you make policies, when you are in the government, you're a finance minister, you're an advisor, you are a part of the CAG, and so on and so forth, what are you considering? What's your yardstick? You want growth, and how are you measuring your growth, or what are your targets? Your target is a higher GDP. So what is the standard measure of growth and the higher GDP? Our policies are relentlessly towards increasing it. Relentlessly is without giving up. By this yardstick, is paimane se, through this parameter, we have never been wealthier or happier. Why? Because most countries are seeing, they are witnessing a growth in GDP. Then if we go by data and the GDP is really rising, then we should be all very wealthy and happy. Being wealthy does not mean being happy, but yeah, let's not talk about it. I want you to take MBA exams right now. So why doesn't it feel that way? Why are we living in such a fractured time with global populism on the rise and wealth inequality as stark as ever? So populism is, when you try to appease to the public, when you try and patao public, okay? So why is it that everybody keeps on talking about things that the public likes, whether or not it has a real impact on their lives or not? And why is wealth inequality increasing? The rich becoming richer and the poor becoming poorer. It is becoming stark or intense more than ever. All right. I have a lot of secret fans, secret haters, and I'm thankful to God for all of you. You guys maintain balance. All right. This is an argument, but put forward by several other critics as well, who resent GDP becoming the all-important variable to track. In a nutshell, they argue that GDP is the wrong way to measure the well-being of a society, and that pursuing policies that solely focus on raising GDP often end up hurting the welfare of the people. Now, ye gaant bandh lijiye, kahin, you might need this to just chapify it in the interview or something, and it's a good sentence, I tell you. So somebody asks you, what do you think about GDP being very justified? You tell them that GDP is the wrong way to measure the well-being of a society. So if I'm an unhappy person, or if I don't have access to the hospital, or I don't have an oxygen cylinder, that has nothing to do with GDP. Yeah. And that pursuing policies that solely focus on raising GDP. So if I, as a part of the government, I'm trying to concentrate on making a policy which increases the GDP, then the welfare of the people gets hurt. So you have to talk about larger things. You have to take the larger picture into consideration, especially in a country as diverse as India. You just cannot keep concentrating on numbers. Numbers won't do a thing. They are important, but they cannot be solely your point of focus. Mischievously enough, sometimes government representatives or ruling party members have tried to hide behind this broader disenchantment with GDP to avoid answering questions on India's faltering GDP growth rate. Now, disenchantment is one of my favorite words somehow. So, enchanted is mantra mugd, I was enchanted by the beauty of Kashmir. Disenchantment is when you expect something really high from a person and then you get disappointed because they were not performing well or something. So you're disenchanted. Does that remind you of someone, maybe a relative, maybe a minister, maybe, I don't know, somebody or the other who must have disappointed you? So I hope you will remember the word. तो कहता है कि भाई mischievously enough, government representatives or ruling party members try to hide behind this dissatisfaction with GDP to avoid answering questions on India's faltering GDP growth rate. So because the government may not want to face the media or the public because this time of criticism and flack is not really welcome. So when you see that the GDP growth rate is falling, they try to hide behind their disenchantment with GDP. They don't want to talk about it. They don't want to show that they are disappointed with this. Now, how far are these ilzams valid? Allegation valid है कि नहीं है? ठीक है? Several people have worded their reservations differently and no single answer can comprehensively counter all allegations. तो सबका इल्ज़ाम अलग अलग तरीके का है. For instance, is GDP a faulty measure? So this is a common question that is asked, that GDP is a faulty measure or not. It all depends on what you use it for. GDP measures the total market value of goods and services in an economy in a year. We've discussed this over and over again. Total value of goods and services in an economy in a year. Does it claim to measure welfare or well-being? भाई आपको किसने पढ़ाया? Who taught you? Please don't worry about Hindi, I'm translating. Who taught you as a part of GDP's definition that GDP is about welfare? Who taught you that GDP is about well-being? Nobody promised that to you. So why are you complaining? So get your definitions right. No. The answer is that if you ask someone that GDP will talk about welfare, the answer is no. It's impractical. Does it claim to measure happiness? Oh no. Please buy me a pastry. Talk about happiness. Please don't talk to me about GDP. It's a stupid thing. You're looking for happiness at the wrong place. Does it claim to measure inequality? No. So when we talk about GDP, we are definitely not talking anything about inequality. Is it a measure of corruption, or does it show that there is a lack of corruption? No. Does it measure the robustness, which means strength of a democracy? No. So whether we are a strong democratic country or a weak democratic country, GDP is a poor thing to talk about. Does it measure pollution or climate change? Answer is again Rachel Soundman. No. Such questions can go on with the same reply. So you keep asking questions like this and you will keep getting the same answer, no. But is it you at fault because you are, like I said, looking for these things in the wrong place? Or is it GDP at fault? So for argument's sake, you could have an economy that has rising levels of inequality, falling levels of democracy, falling levels of civil liberty, increasing pollution, worsening gender equality, and still have rising levels of GDP. Point to be noted, my lord. For argument's sake, you can have our democracy going to the dogs, liberties being ruined, pollution going all high, gender equality all getting wobbly, gender balance getting all wobbly, and still your GDP can show that you are doing extremely well as a country. The question is, does the existence of any or all of these ills imply that GDP is a faulty measure? भाई आपने बोला कि there is no equality, there is no civil liberty, there is no democracy, men and women are not equal, क्या करूँ मैं मर जाऊँ and all of that. Why are you blaming GDP, dude? GDP is the total market value of goods and services. Why are you blaming this harmless chap? It's like you guys blaming me for propaganda in the last YouTube session. It has nothing to do with me. It's your problem. You have not gotten your definitions right. The answer is no. The GDP is a simple measure and berating it, डांटना, scolding it, by judging it based on social or moral norms would be completely missing the point of using GDP. You completely miss the point of GDP when you talk about these things just by saying, अरे GDP बढ़ रहा है तो क्या हुआ, life तो झंड है. अरे life will remain झंड as long as you don't work on yourself. GDP does not promise making your life better. It is just the total value of goods and services. For instance, GDP can go up with both prostitution as well as coal mining. अभी GDP बढ़ाने का है. So you want to increase goods and services का price, चलो. So prostitution से भी पैसा आएगा economy और coal mining से भी आएगा. And GDP is not at fault ना बाबा. GDP is not saying कि please count prostitution, don't count coal mining or vice versa. The question of whether an economy should allow either prostitution or mining or both. So if you're in a country like Thailand, maybe both are legal. If you're in a country like India, maybe one is legal, one is illegal, but both exist. Maybe you are in some, I don't know, weird country. Mining, I think, is legal everywhere apart from, places where you have forests and stuff. But otherwise, this is completely dependent on the country's government, all right, and the policies that they make. Neither is completely separate from what happens to GDP when either of these activities is undertaken openly. So whether or not prostitution is legal or whether it's illegal, it does not have an impact. If you are counting the money, you are counting the money. If you're leaving out the money, you're leaving it out. Simple. So that does not make any change. Positive and negative is out of question here, and whether you think that making it legal is positive or negative is another whole new level of debate, whether you like this and you dislike that. So these arguments don't work then. Chalo. So which means we have decided that it's not faulty. We are looking for things at the wrong place. Then let's come to another question. Is it adequate? Is it enough? Okay, so you are saying, dude, that I was looking at the wrong place. But then, is GDP enough? This brings us back to how we calculate it. The controversy surrounding the revisions in 2015. On paper, 2015 revisions brought India's GDP calculation in line with the global norms. So we were trying to match India's standards of calculating GDP with the standards of calculation of the global developed countries. But we have discrepancies. So discrepancy is when things don't match, when there is incompatibility. All right. Beyond the methodology, in an economy such as India, there are several limitations with regard to data availability. By data, मतलब तुम लोगों की बात अलग है. You guys can find numbers and DPs and I don't know the data from anywhere, and then you also have, today the women of the class were telling me that nowadays the messages that come are, please don't block me, पहले बात कर लेते हैं. So maybe data is easily available for you, but the government is still struggling. You guys are better than the government or what? So then कोई भी method adopt कर लो. Data की availability is still a struggle. In a country as diverse and huge as India, how will you find out how much is the every product and every service which is not on paper? Like I gave you the example of small scale industries, it's not even there. Who even keeps an account of that? For instance, the mere fact that a large part of India's economy functions in the informal sector. So I keep giving you Google Pay, yeah, I keep giving you chocolates. You don't give me anything. अभी इस heartbreaking transaction का खिताब किसको जाता है? मतलब अभी कौन सा GDP में काउंट हो रहा है कि मैं नुकसान में हूँ, you are in profit and I am in loss? Nobody is counting, right? So I am the one clearly in loss. So nobody is taking care of the informal sector. It's not being counted and estimated. इसका हिसाब किताब कहीं वहाँ हो रहा है शायद. So then suggests that the formal estimates of GDP would be missing out on accurately capturing. कर ही नहीं सकते accurately capture. There is a lot of informal transaction happening and there is no data available about it. What about the criticism that GDP often fails to account for all the things that bring down our welfare and diminish our well-being? For example, you might be using coal, but coal is a non-renewable source. So then you are damaging fossil fuels. You are counting the final money that you made out of running that, let's say, a thermal power station running on coal. But what about the nuksan, the harm, the coal, the fossil fuel that you lost? You are not considering that welfare loss. This is true. GDP fails to capture welfare loss. But, read the but here, you also fail to capture the welfare gain. How? Then the reverse is also true. GDP does not adequately account for welfare gains. For example, if we have seen during pandemic a bar of soap by साबुन की टिकिया, हेमा, रेखा, जया और सुषमा सबकी पसंद निर्मा, one साबुन टिकिया and a simple mask, both of which can be obtained for less than 10 rupees. I mean 10 rupees I'm not sure. Nirma and mask I'll have to see. I don't think I can get it for less than 10, but yeah, let's say 10. So provide welfare far in excess of rupees 10 by saving lives. So I have been using whatever soap and whatever mask, okay, for 10 rupees or 100 rupees, and I did not have COVID, and I'm alive and kicking. And sadly for you, but I'm again teaching live on YouTube. Now, if you see the welfare gain, my life being saved is not being counted in the GDP of the country, despite the fact that I'm a tax-paying citizen. So welfare gain is also not counted. Now, if I fell ill, if I was not using Nirma and using some shitty sabun and not using a good mask, and I ended up, God forbid, in some damn hospital struggling for a cylinder, or maybe I were dead, who would count it? So then the cost of welfare gain is also being missed out. So gain bhi nahi count hua and loss is also not counted. Both are missing. By the way, before we go ahead, there is this super duper bumper offer going on where you get 1 month free with a 6-month subscription, and you get to prepare with us for your OMETs also, other management entrance tests like IIT, ZAT and SNAP. Use my code Karishma Life for a discount, and these are the rates. If you're a 2021 student, please avail of the offer. If you're a 2022 student, apply for a 24-month program. As far as a broader question of people's well-being is concerned, of course GDP is inadequate, but again that is by design. भाई कहाँ लिखा था उसकी definition में कि ये welfare calculate करेगा? In other words, if one wants to know about the state of air pollution, or the cost of getting a hospital bed, or the unequal distribution of wealth, you will have to map other measures. Stop saying that GDP is at fault. Understand that there are different parameters, different measures to calculate different things. You cannot be using the same utensil. मतलब तुम लोगों की तो बात अलग है. You can also make chai in kadai. I'm not talking about you. Normal people, by normal people I mean basically married people, they have separate utensils for separate things. So I'm not going to make chai in a pressure cooker, right? So you similarly do not have GDP for everything which is cooked in the kitchen. You have different measures. In his book, Pilin devotes several chapters discussing the alternatives. So what are the alternative substitutes? There are GDP per capita, there is median income, there is Gini coefficient for inequality, there is net domestic product, there is well-being, which is calculated by using some Maryland's genuine progress indicator. I will pretend that I know it, but I don't. And lastly, carbon dioxide emissions, green taxes and stuff. There are so many alternatives. Why do you just miss out on all of them and then you keep blaming GDP? But pick any measure and you will find faults with it. So if you talk about any one of them, let's say you talk about Gini coefficient, it has its problems. GDP, own problems. NDP, its own problems. Especially if you want to treat it as the single go-to metric for making policies. If you just start using black pepper in every damn dish out there and then you blame black pepper, then you need to improve your cooking. Black pepper is not at fault. So you have to use black pepper along with the other spices, and then you will probably have a good dish. So for instance, we often use GDP per capita. Per capita is again per head as a measure to provide a more accurate picture. So इससे क्यों more accurate picture आता है? Because then you are considering average per person. Well-being of an average Indian किससे बेहतर निकल कर आती है? What is a more reliable or a more accurate? I'm not saying completely accurate. Please get this right. More accurate is GDP per capita instead of GDP. Why? If one looks at the overall GDP, India is one of the largest growing economies, standing next to US, China, Japan, Japan. To an alien who knows nothing else, overall GDP data will put India among the best placed countries in the world. But if we look at GDP per capita, भाई मतलब हम गरीबों का अकाउंट भी तो कोई देखेगा कि नहीं देखेगा? The picture changes. Even Bangladesh is now better off than us. Right? So why do we want to do an MBA? Because we know our bank balances, isn't it? So you have to give us a more accurate picture. But even this measure doesn't do justice. For one, much like GDP, it too suffers from the inability to map variables such as rising pollution. Per capita GDP can easily fail to even spot rising inequality. So inequality ke liye we are going to use Gini coefficient. We are not even, GDP per capita is not going to help us. Imagine the top 100 Indians doubling their income in a year while the rest of the India remains at the same level. In such a scenario, per capita GDP will rise and give an impression, albeit a faulty one, that the average Indian is better off. So let's say Amitabh Bachchan is making more movies on Amazon Prime, and Deepika Padukone is also making, I don't know why are they doing this, but they are making a remake of The Intern, which is a very beautiful Hollywood movie. So then these guys are making money. Yeah, but my maid lost her money and her wages because there was a lockdown for the last 2 months. Now the GDP must have increased. Why? Because the total amount of services ka cost has increased. But actually there are people who don't have money. The average Indian is better off. We can't say that. It's a faulty I would say, parameter, even if I'm calculating it per capita. Not surprisingly, this book author summarized that there is no simple way of representing every aspect of well-being in a single number in the way GDP describes output. This has led to GDP being used as a proxy for economic welfare and general welfare. But GDP बहुत broad है. So because GDP is very broad and it describes market economic output like no one else, this is why everybody considers that economic welfare है GDP, general welfare है GDP. So you're after it. Actually, it cannot do everything for you. It's like you coming after the teacher all the time. कहाँ से पढ़ लें? टीचर. क्यों पढ़ लें? टीचर. शेड्यूल कौन बनाएगा? टीचर. सुबह कौन उठाएगा? टीचर. क्लास कौन लेगा? टीचर. डाउट कौन बताएगा? टीचर. गाली कौन खाएगा? टीचर. फीस कौन देगा? टीचर. मैम फ्री में पढ़ा दो. Dude, you've got your priorities wrong. The teacher can't do everything for you. The teacher will do the teacher's job. You have to do your job. Stop blaming GDP. That is why they argue to move beyond GDP when assessing a country's health and complement GDP with a broader dashboard. Dashboard is a collection of the features or plans through which you will be able to calculate all of these. That would reflect the distribution of well-being in society and its sustainability across its social, economic, and environmental dimensions. The challenge, they say, is to make the dashboard small enough to be easily comprehensible and large enough to summarize what we care about. तो कहते हैं भाई dashboard बनाएंगे. We will use all the things that we were talking about: GDP, NDP, GDP per capita, Gini coefficient, Marillos, green taxes, carbon emissions, global warming, everything. The problem is these are so many that to make it small and summarize them is it's very difficult. And you also want it to be all encompassing, overarching at the same time. So it's a big deal. That brings us to the end of the session, the upshot. So upshot is like the consequence or the final result. It is true that solely focusing on GDP can lead to policies that are blind to people's broader well-being. So you cannot solely focus on it. For instance, completely private provisioning of basic amenities such as health and education may result in GDP going up, but may result in bringing down people's welfare as the poor and marginalized find it harder to access. So capitalism के साथ यही problem था ना, we did it. That private provisioning is increasing, so we have lots of international schools these days. Yeah, GDP is also going up. Yeah, but then my biased children are still going to government school. Even if I want them to go to private school, she is not giving them an admission there. So then the poor and marginalized are unable to access these services. So the GDP is increasing, but then there is no well-being happening on the ground level. Similarly, policies that raise industrial output may or may not raise industrial employment. Industrial output बढ़ गया है, एम्प्लॉयमेंट बढ़े और तनख्वाह बढ़े उन लेबरर्स की, ये ज़रूरी नहीं है. बट इट इज़ ऑल्सो ट्रू दैट इट इज़ ईजियर टू बिरेट जीडीपी को डांटना आसान है जैसे टीचर पे चिल्लाना आसान है, दैन टू फाइंड अ वर्दी रिप्लेसमेंट, बजाय इसके कि किसी एक टीचर के बजाय दूसरे पे चले जाएं. Instead of pulling down GDP, it is better to look at a broader set of variables to get a more nuanced, which means detailed understanding of people's well-being. I have a few announcements to make. Those of you found the session useful, please press the like button. Those of you who hate me, please press the dislike button, and because you hate me a lot, please press the dislike button twice. Thank you. By the way, you have scholarship tests going on Sundays 12 noon, and this is my code Karishma Live that you could use. If you are a non-plus student, please make sure that you take this test, okay? And who knows, you might get a further discount more than 10% and you'll be able to subscribe. Apart from this, I want you to once maybe read the article. More than reading the article, what is important is that you start practicing passages on commerce, economics and business, especially if you are not comfortable with them, especially if you're a science student, all right? Our next session will happen on 23 and our super duper blockbuster session will happen on 28th. IPMAT, BB and hotel management courses have also been started by Unacademy. So in case you have Padosi, Bhai, Behan, etc., please recommend them to join. And these are the various batches which are going on. Apart from this, Unacademy is kind enough to offer and extend its Ask a Doubt feature to plus as well as non-plus students. Please make full use of it. I really hope that the hard work that I have put in all these sessions is helping you, and it gives me immense joy to be able to share the little knowledge that I have with you. And I absolutely love teaching, and I think everybody knows this. Everybody who's seen me teaching will know that. It will really be nice if you can be polite when you are talking to each other in the comment section. And that's all I can teach you, because you guys are adults and you're not children anymore. With these words, I would finish today's session and I'll see you day after tomorrow. If you have any article suggestions, do drop them in the comment box. please press the like button and dislike button twice. Yeah, you know the setting. Yeah. So I'll see you on 23rd. Till then, take good care of your